Back, guys, we are going to continue with our content, especially in regards to senses. So here's where we are continuing. Last thing we were talking about was hearing in our last video. Now we need to talk about vision. Remember, vision is the more technical term for this. It's also referred to as sight. Now, obviously, the eyes are the major organ for sight. We should be comfortable with that. They allow us to perceive shape, distance, movement, color, and depth. So quite a bit that the eyes are capable of doing. The human eye is about the size of a ping pong ball. Typically, the eye is relative to the size of the creature. The larger the creature, the larger the eye. But there's usually a limit to how large the eyes will get. About the size of a ping pong ball, fits in your palm of your hand. Vision is processed via photoreceptors. We talked about that on Wednesday, but our last video that we did, or a couple videos ago, we were talking about how there's different types of receptors, right? Mechanoreceptors, which are more mechanical, more of an actual act, like a pressure or vibration. Photoreceptors, which we're going to be talking about in this video, which is all about light. And then, of course, your chemoreceptors, which is all chemical-based, which is going to be more oriented around your senses of smell and taste. All right, so here's the eye. Now, here's the deal. In regards to this diagram is okay, is decent, but there's another diagram that's a lot more clear as far as the structures we need to know. So for the time being, let's just go over some of the major, like the basic structures. So first and foremost, we have the cornea. The cornea is going to be this transparent coating. It covers the iris and pupil. If you have contact lenses and you apply contact lenses, that's what you're physically touching. You're applying the contact lens onto the cornea. Then we have the iris. That's a structure that a lot of us already know and are familiar with. The iris is going to be the colorful parts of our eye, correct? So that's going to be the color of your eye. The iris, interestingly enough, is also the part of the eye that adapts to light. So if it's too bright, the iris is going to shrink and contract. That actually causes the pupil to also shrink. If it's too dark, then the iris is going to expand or dilate, and that expanding process allows you to see more because of low light. All right. Okay, next, the pupil and the lens. The pupil, as we were just mentioning, is going to be the center of your eye, dead center. It's where light enters. It's the part of your eye that has no color, no nothing. It should look like black, basically, because there's nothing there. Then we have this glass-like structure found in your eye called the lens. Just think of a camera, right? Like for a camera to take photos, it needs a lens inside of it. Similar situation for your eyes. Your eyes are focusing light through the lens, and that light will then be reflected into the back of your eye called the retina. So that's pretty interesting, pretty unique concept. Here we see some extra structures such as the retina and the optic nerve. The retina is the innermost layer of the eye. It's in this like amber color for this particular diagram, but the retina is going to be where your photoreceptors are. So meaning the retina is your part of your eye that translates light into an electrical stimulus. Now, once it's turned into an electrical stimulus, where does it need to go? The brain, the occipital lobe. So what's going to send it to the brain? The optic nerve, which we talked about that back in central nervous system when we talked about the cranial nerves. Now, here is that diagram that we really wanted to focus on. This is what we really wanted to pay attention to. So as far as that's concerned, there's a ton happening here. We don't need to learn all of this, but we need to know a good number of these. So let me just circle once again the ones that we did talk about. So for example, we talked about the iris, the pupil, and the cornea. No big deal. We talked about the lens. We talked about the optic nerve, and we talked about the retina. Now, just to not make things messy, notice that the eye is actually made up of 3 separate layers. We need to know those layers. So, knowing that, let's talk about them for a second. The retina was the innermost layer, and that's using that yellow color to indicate. That's where the photoreceptors are, which are going to be rods and cones. We'll talk about that in the next video. The choroid is going to be the middle layer, and that's where your vascular layer. What does it mean to be vascular? Pertains to blood. So that's where your arteries and veins are. And then the sclera is the layer we can already see. You can see it from the outside, actually. It's the whites of your eye, which you can very clearly see surrounding the middle. So the sclera, the choroid, and the retina, as long as you know where the layers are, you're fine. Now, there are two other structures we need to pay attention to. We have this fluid found inside the middle of the eye, and that fluid is known as the vitreous humor. So that is something we need to know. That is just a fluid found inside. When we do our dissection, we'll be able to see that it looks sort of like a jelly. And then the last thing we need to pay attention to is this particular structure right here. In front of the eye, I'm going to recircle that. In front of the eye, right behind the cornea. Oops, sorry about that. In front of the eye, right behind the cornea, we have this extra fluid called aqueous humor. A little messy. So we have this aqueous humor that is going to be right behind the cornea. That aqueous humor, simply put, just helps light focus into the cornea and then back into the eye, right? So all things considered, that's about 10 different structures in the eye that we need to know, just like there's about 10 different structures of the ear that we need to know. So practice makes perfect. As long as you can get some rehearsal in and start reviewing, especially the eye, because the ear is at least in Quizlet, but the eye is not. If you can get some practice in, you'll be in a good place and a better place, we'll put it that way, to be prepared. All right? So that's where we're going to conclude, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you on the next one.